Based on a true story, the film takes place in Detroit in 1984, introducing us to Richard Wershey and his teenage son Rick, a pair of illegal arms dealers looking for the best deals at a fair. After buying a couple of rifles, the duo returns home, where they find Dawn, Richard's oldest daughter, completely high and having relations with a guy named Ta. Richard doesn't hesitate to chase him off, threatening him with his rifle, but he earns his daughter's hatred in the process. She blames him for their mother leaving them. The next morning, Rick is woken up by Dawn, who tells him she's moving in with Ta because she can't stand living with their father anymore. Shortly after, Rick heads to the hideout of a gang member named Johnny to offer him the AK rifles. Johnny accepts them immediately, although Rick manages to get more money by convincing him to buy silencers made by his father. Because of that, he earns the admiration of Johnny's younger brother Boo, who invites him to a skating rink. There, Rick becomes interested in Kathy, an attractive young woman, but Boo makes it clear she's out of his league, as she's the mayor's niece. And besides, Johnny has already been flirting with her. The following day, Richard is interrogated by Alex and Frank, two FBI agents who have been monitoring his son's activities for days. They see Rick as a potential informant because of his connections to the criminal underworld. Richard doesn't want his son involved, but Rick himself helps the agents identify some gang members, though he refuses to give them any information about Johnny. That night, Rick is stopped by the agents, who force him into their car to meet Jackson, a rather intimidating narcotics officer. Even so, the young man still doesn't want to work with them, but changes his mind when they reveal that a recent homicide was committed with a weapon his father sold. To avoid them sending his father to prison, Rick agrees to become their informant. The agents send him to buy drugs in a dangerous neighborhood. After pulling it off, he receives his first informant payment, though it's only the beginning of his new job. Another day, Johnny questions Rick, making it clear that he should keep Boo away from illegal activities. When Rick promises to do so, Johnny gives him a suit to wear at his wedding to Kathy. After the party, Rick and Boo run into Brenda, a girl Rick was in love with in elementary school. He invites her to a drive-in, where she asks why he stopped going to high school. He just answers that he's been busy. After that, he musters the courage to kiss her. On his next job with the FBI, Jackson hands Rick a package of cocaine worth $4,000 for him to sell little by little and officially establish himself as a local dealer. Rick follows through, putting together a sales team and earning a lot of money. That's how he lives until 1985, when his father sees him in the car with the agents. Immediately, Richard bursts into Rick's room, finding his savings, $40,000. Back at home, Rick gets a scolding from his father, who would rather see him in prison than working for the FBI. Rick tries to defend himself, but Richard slaps him. At that point, Rick tells him Dawn was right about him. He's just a loser who won't let him do anything. That evening, Rick meets his sister at a restaurant to ask her to come back home. While they talk, a thief takes advantage of the keys Rick left in his grandfather Ray's car to steal it. Rick and Dawn try to stop him with their guns, but only manage to get themselves arrested by some cops. Rick is quickly released thanks to his FBI friends, although they're not happy about his dumb crime. When he goes home, Ray yells at Rick about his car, so Richard seizes the moment to show his son that his actions have consequences. But Rick just ignores him. This incident also catches Johnny's attention. Johnny already knows Rick sells drugs around the neighborhood, so he suggests Rick work for his gang to avoid them all getting arrested. After that, Johnny's crew heads to Las Vegas, where Rick and Boo have the time of their lives before attending a boxing match. Sadly, they can't get in because Leon, a supposed ally, sold their tickets to another gangster named Black Ed. Despite that, the group attends the after-party for the fight, although Johnny can't resist hitting Ed with a champagne bottle. To finish the job, Johnny orders a drive-by shooting at Leon's house. Leon wasn't there, so the only people injured are his young nephews, one of whom ends up dying. Rick hears about this on the TV news, where they also reveal the shooters used AK rifles, the same ones his father had sold. Somehow, the police managed to connect Johnny to the homicide, which raises his suspicions of a snitch in their ranks. Worried for his own hide, Rick starts ignoring Alex and Frank. He also feels very guilty about the death of a child, as any normal person would. Trying to redeem himself, He decides to make peace with his father and promises to go back to school, while Richard disposes of the AK rifles. Rick is then visited by Nug, one of Johnny's henchmen, who shoots him in the stomach without warning. Fortunately, doctors save his life in the hospital, where the agents inform Richard they now have enough evidence to arrest Johnny. Even so, Richard is bent on avenging his son. He waits in his car near Johnny's hideout, although he can't bring himself to act. And it's a good thing, because the next day an FBI squad raids all of Johnny's hangouts, arresting the entire gang, including Boo. This puts an end to Rick's relationship with the agents, who keep their word about ignoring his father's criminal history. After a few days in the hospital, Rick is finally able to go home. Although his father is thrilled he's back, Rick longs to move to another city. We jump to 1986, where Rick is living a normal life like any other teenager, until he receives an unexpected visit from Brenda's younger brother, who reveals that his sister has given birth to Rick's baby. When Rick finally meets his daughter, he can't help but feel some joy, especially when he sees his father holding her so lovingly. But on the way back home, Rick once again feels depressed about his current situation. He doesn't know how he'll support his child. Well, actually, he does, by selling drugs. But his father forbids it. While they're arguing, Richard nearly crashes into another car. Although he manages to swerve, they end up landing off the side of the road. With the vehicle wrecked, Rick insists again on the idea of selling drugs. Only that will improve their lives. He goes to visit Art, a known trafficker, who makes him a dealer. Thanks to that, Rick and Richard discover Dawn's whereabouts. She's living in a drug rehab center. Naturally, they have to force her to come home. And once she's there, the situation doesn't get any better, as she starts suffering withdrawal. While Dawn is battling her condition, Rick is raking in big money by putting together a new sales team and showering gifts on his daughter. A year later, Rick has become the new Johnny of the city, earning the nickname White Boy Rick. He's managed to open the movie rental store his father always wanted. Meanwhile, his sister has fully recovered. Returning to his criminal circle, Rick draws the attention of the now lonely Kathy, and they start a relationship. He's taken seriously the whole idea of becoming the new Johnny. The next day starts off normally for the Wershey family, until a police squad led by Jackson bursts into their house to arrest Rick. They found a shipment of 8 kilos of cocaine, enough for a life sentence. Unfortunately, the country only sees him as a dangerous young criminal and will never believe the FBI roped him into the drug world. All Alex and Frank can offer is for him to collaborate in one last sting to catch a bigger target in exchange for reducing his sentence. Rick makes the first move, asking Kathy to help him send a large shipment of drugs. The operation is sabotaged as planned by the FBI, resulting in the arrest of corrupt cops and civilians connected to the mayor. But at his trial, 17-year-old Rick is sentenced to life in prison, contrary to what Alex and Frank had promised him. In prison, he's informed that he'll only have 1 hour a day in the yard and will spend most of his time in his cell, because as everyone knows, inmates hate snitches. As for Richard, he tries to remind Alex of their deal, but she replies that the FBI did all they could. However, the judge refused to show any leniency toward Rick. Unsatisfied with that answer, Richard goes to Frank, who reveals that Rick had to take the fall because they couldn't prove the mayor's corruption. A year later, Dawn visits her brother in prison to show him how much his daughter has grown. Then it's Richard's turn, and he excitedly tells Rick that the state might overturn the life sentence law so he could be out in 6 years on parole. But Rick Jr. doesn't seem too hopeful, warning that society wants him behind bars. Seeing his son that way breaks Richard's heart, and he apologizes for not being a better father and for failing to give him an easier life. During the end credits, we learn Rick spent over 30 years in prison, holding the record for the longest sentence given to a nonviolent offender in the state of Michigan. Finally, in 2017, he was granted parole. Though his father had already passed away in 2014, at least he was able to reunite with his daughter Keisha, who is now happily married with 2 children. In the end, we hear a real audio recording of Rick on the day he was released, explaining that his case was very unfair, but he never lost hope.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.